Hey, what's up guys? David Cohen here for Learn Now Effects and welcome back to another exciting Fusion tutorial. Today, I'm going to be showing you 4 things that'll help you take your motion graphics skills to the next level while creating this dynamic text animation inside of DaVinci Resolve Fusion. And if you stay tuned till the end, I'll let you guys in on a new free plugin I made to help your motion graphics stand out. So without any further ado, let's check it out. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my project settings and I want to change my frame rate to 24 frames a second. And the reason why is because it is a very accepted format and you can use it everywhere from YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all of these social media platforms. If that's what you're creating motion graphics for, they all use 24 frames a second. It's basically an international format. Even in Asia, Europe, and Africa, they use 24 frames a second now when it comes to YouTube. I heard that they used to use 25 frames a second, but it's still more common and it'll be easier for you to use 24 frames a second in your projects just because it's a more accepted format. And I'm going to create this animation in 1920 by 1080. So I'm just going to click on save to save our settings. So I'm going to right click on the media pool and create a new Fusion comp, and I want to make it 9 seconds long because I have 3 text holders and each text holder needs 3 seconds. So 9 seconds is this composition. And if you want to add more text holders, keep in mind that each text holder takes 3 seconds. So I'm going to click on create and drag the composition onto the timeline. So make sure your composition is selected and that the playhead is over the composition. And I'm going to head over to Fusion. So now that we're in Fusion, I'm going to take my media out node and I'm going to drag it to the corner where it won't be getting in our way. Make sure to right click on the grid and select Arrange Tools to Grid and hover over the options here and select orthogonal pipes. Just click on it to make sure this check appears, and if the check is already there, then just leave it alone. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the color. And more specifically, I mean the color palette. So what is a color palette? A color palette is a group of colors that work well together. They complement each other when they're used together in motion graphics. And if you're making the type of motion graphics that I'm making now, you would typically want to use softer colors. You don't want to use colors like bright red, like this, because this is a little bit distracting. You want the colors to be comfortable. You want them to be colors that a person is used to seeing, like in nature. So the more comfortable the person is while they're watching your motion graphic, the better. You want the colors to be pretty soft. You want them to be a little bit maybe darker. You want them a little bit less saturated. So if you understand the HSL over here, HSV, sorry, you have hue, saturation, and volume. So you want to make sure that the value and saturation are not both one. You can have one of them at one, but both of them at one might be a little bit too intense for what we're doing right now. So you can make this a little bit darker. You can take a little bit away from the saturation, and you can create an entire color palette of colors that you think work together. And it can be pretty difficult if you're just getting started to create your own color palette, but you will get the hang of it eventually. So there is a great website where you can download free color palettes to use in your project called colors.co. So I'm going to put the link to this in the description. And here you can just browse through trending color palettes to find what suits your purpose. I mean, this is a nice one. We have some really nice color palettes over here that were made by the users, and they shared the color palette so everyone can use them. So I'm going to be using this specific color palette in our project, and I'm just going to show you how to use this in Resolve. So you want to click on these 3 dots here and select Export Palette, and I want to export this as an image. And this is going to be the name of the file, so I'm just going to type and click export. So this will download it as a PNG file, which you can then go into DaVinci Resolve and load it up as a PNG, drag it onto your flow, and here is our color palette. Now, these colors work very well for the purpose that we're going to be using today, and I'll put a link to the specific palette in the link in the description below. So basically, all of these colors complement each other when you use them in motion graphics together. And you might be wondering, why do we have white here? And the thing is that this isn't exactly white. When you're creating motion graphics, you don't always want to use a pure white color. Because pure white, when you look at the R, G, and B values, it's 1, 1, 1. Sometimes you want to have it tinted a little bit towards yellow to imitate natural sunlight, like as if sunlight is bouncing off of a white surface. And things in reality are not always white. They're a little bit darker than white in the real world, even though that there are things that are white. But I'm just saying that it's more common to see yellow light reflect off of a white surface. So that's why they used yellowish white. This is white tinted a little bit towards the yellow side, but you can still tell that it's white. So my tip to you, if you're creating your own color palettes, experiment, try it out, see what works for you. You might have a really easy time picking colors that work well together. But one thing that's very important to do when you're making your own color palette is make sure that you don't have blue light reduction on your screen. Make sure that you disable that. Otherwise, all of your colors will be out of whack. They'll just be tinted to the wrong place. So you might choose the wrong color if you have that on. And a great tip that I learned from my friends Andrew Hazelden and Peter Van Houten is that you want to go to your Fusion settings and make sure that your user interface, you want to enable use gray background interface, because you want to have neutral colors in your user interface. Otherwise, your eyes will get too used to having the blue interface and they will think that that bluish gray is real gray. And this is a very useful tip. I can't take the credit for this. My friends taught me this and it is so true. I didn't even notice that the grid was a little bit bluish. And if you go into the DaVinci Resolve settings and the preferences, you can go into user UI settings. You want to make sure to enable use gray background in viewers and use gray background in user interface. So I'm just going to close this, and these things will only be loaded the next time you start DaVinci Resolve or Fusion, but it's still very important to know when you're creating your own color palettes. So I'm going to take this background node and I'm going to send it to the second viewer, and I'm going to switch to double viewer. You want to make sure that this color palette is in the second viewer, the viewer that is closest to your inspector, and that this one and that the background is in the first viewer, the one that's further from the inspector. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this background and I am going to switch it, the type, to four corner. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this top left corner and I'm going to select this light blue. Top right corner, I'm going to select this medium blue. Bottom left, I'm going to select this darker blue. And bottom right, I'm also going to select this darker blue. As we can see, we have a very nice gradient ramp here. So one thing you want to do when you create gradients at all, even a simple gradient, not a four corner, any type of gradient, you want to make sure that your depth here on the image tab set to float 32. Float 16 works fine as well. It just has a little bit less time processing, so it should be fine. So here's our background and it's looking pretty good. I'm gonna drag this down and move the color palette to the side, because the next thing we want to focus on is our text. So in our text, I'm going to write something like create motion graphics. And I'm going to send this to this viewer. All right, I can bring the size up just a little bit, but as you can see, the font is very boring. And that brings us to the second thing on our list, which is fonts. So basically the way it works is that when a person sees a new font, subconsciously they get drawn towards this graphic to actually pay attention to it because they don't recognize the font. I mean, no one actually pays attention to the fonts because they want to, but subconsciously the person sees the new font and thinks like this is going to be something interesting, it's something new. But this isn't what I'm trying to get to right now. So I'm going to show you a font that we're going to be using in this video, is Nor'Wester, and it looks pretty good. It really works very good in motion graphics. You probably haven't seen this font much before, and that's exactly what we're aiming for actually. We're looking for a font that isn't commonly used. But where can you find so many good fonts? Well, you're in luck because there's a great website called The Font, which has tons of great fonts that you can use for free. And you can just go through all of these different kinds of all of these styles, and you'll see all of these interesting fonts that they have here. And I mean, they're really good fonts. I use them all the time, and I'll put the link to this website in the link in the description. Most people already know about this. If you're into motion graphics, it's like the largest font site out there, I think. And I'm also going to put a link to this Nor'Wester font in the description as well. So now that we know about our font, I'm just going to change the color of the text, and I'm going to select this text node, and here we have the color picker. Just drag the eyedropper here over this white, and now our text is this color. So I'm pretty sure that's basically it for the color palette. And I'm just going to right click on this text node, and I want to rename it. So I'm just going to write create motion graphics. So it'll be easier to organize this later. So to create our animation with the text, I'm just going to switch to single viewer right now and set this to fit. So to create our animation, it's actually very simple. It might have looked like it's very hard to create that type of animation, but in Fusion it's actually very easy, and I'll show you how to do it. So go to the style text in this text node, right click and select follower. So make sure that your node is selected because this can get pretty interesting. So go over to the modifiers tab and set the delay to 1. And everything else you would leave at default. You would leave this from left to right, and range all characters, delay type between each character, and 1 is pretty good. That's basically what we need. And I'm going to go to frame 0, and I'm going to go to the size, and I'm going to set a keyframe, and I'm going to bring the value to 0. And next I'm going to go to frame 12, and I'm going to bring the value to probably 0.12, maybe 0.1.13. Yeah. So if we play this, we'll see that we get this very interesting animation. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to frame 36, and I'm going to set another keyframe on the size, and I'm going to go to frame 48, and I'm going to bring the size back to 0. So let's play this text animation. Just make sure to turn off high quality and motion blur, and this will play a lot faster. Yeah, those little green bounding boxes will go away. I probably shouldn't have highlighted the text. So that's basically all that there is to this animation. But this brings us to part 3, which is easing. So what is easing? Let me explain it using a brightness contrast node. So let's just focus on our brightness contrast node right now. It doesn't even matter what's in the viewer. So if I go to frame 0, bring the value to 0 and create a keyframe. Then I go to frame 5 and create the keyframe at val and make it the value 5. If we open the Spline Editor and view the spline of our brightness contrast, just to make this a bit larger, we'll see that the line is completely straight. There's no curvature to this line. Why? Because the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So basically what this means is that at frame 0, the value, focus on this value over here, the value will be 0. 1 frame forward, the value will be 1. At frame 2, the value will be 2. At frame 3, it will be 3, 4, it will be 4, 5, it will be 5, etc., etc. So basically this is a very linear animation, and this isn't good because linear animations are not realistic. It's not like a person can start running at 15 miles an hour. I mean, it just doesn't happen. You can't start running at 15 miles an hour. You have to run slowly and you get up to speed. And then before you stop, you slow down. And that's exactly what we want to do with our text. So the easiest way to do this is just to highlight both of these points. So just left click and hold it down and drag this over the points and select Shift S. Hold down Shift on your keyboard and click S. So here we get a nice curve. And what we see here is that it starts off slowly and then it gets up to speed. Then towards the end, it slows down. So that's very nice, realistic curve. I mean, there are definitely a lot of different things you can do with this. You can make the handles longer, like this, so that it takes longer to start and longer to end, like for it to accelerate for a longer amount of time, and then be fast in the middle, and then decelerate for a longer amount of time. There are tons of things you can do with these handles, but basically the easiest way to do it is just Shift S. And this gives us just a little bit of easing in our animation, but it makes it so much more realistic. I cannot stress this enough, how much better it makes animations. And there are definitely other things you can do with these easings. You can make it a bounce, you can make it a bounce back, you can do so many things. And I can make an entire tutorial just about easing and a great way to add bounce to text and to shape elements. And I probably would. It actually sounds like a good idea to make a tutorial about that. So I want to select this node and go to the Spline Editor and select this motion graphics text and make it fit. Now select these 2 points and click Shift S. You don't want to select all of these points and click Shift S, otherwise this will happen. You don't want any change going on over here. So I'm just going to undo that. You only want to change the part in the animation where the text is actually animated. So select these two, Shift S, these two, Shift S, and we have an eased in and eased out animation. So I'm going to close the Spline Editor. And if we go to the beginning of this animation, we'll see that looks like this. If the text isn't selected, it actually looks better. All right, so this is our text. So let's create copies of this. I'm going to Control C or Command if you're on a Mac. Just instead of Control, use Command if you're on a Mac, and Control V. And I'm going to rename this to in Davinci Resolve. And I can actually just copy this text, Control C, and I'm going to click on OK. And I just want to paste the text here so I don't have to write it twice. So here is our animation if we view it. But we want to offset this a little bit. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play this text and I want to find the frame where it ends because the keyframes don't restrict the animation when it comes to the follower. Since we added a delay of 1, it will add delay of 1 for each letter that we have in this text box. So this will vary depending on how many letters you have in the text box. So I'm just going to play this and move forward frame by frame until we find the part where it disappears. So in our case, it's at frame 70, but you would want to check where it ends in your own animation. So I'm going to select this node and I'm going to open the Spline Editor. So this create motion graphics, we need it, but we only want to see it. We don't want to edit the curves. It's done. We don't want to change the curves at all. So I'm just going to click on it once, and we have to make sure that we get these little squares inside of the checkboxes. What this means is that we can see the curve, we can view it, but we can't edit it. It's like a read-only sort of thing. And the in Davinci Resolve, the second text has to have a check mark in the box. That means that we can see it and that we can edit it. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and make sure that your playhead is on the frame where the animation of the first text stops. So select these two, select all of these keyframes, and this is only of the second text. And I'm going to hold down Shift on my keyboard and I'm going to drag it. And this doesn't always work from the first time, so have a little bit of patience. Might want to undo it and hit Shift again. So I'm just going to undo that because I didn't do it right. It moved the value a little bit, and we don't want to move the value. We just want to move the position on the time. So I'm going to close the Spline Editor now. and I'm going to create another copy of the text. First, I'm going to play this and show you that it starts when this text ends. All right, so I'm going to save our animation, and I'm going to rename this to my third text. All right, and I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to copy it. Okay, and I'm going to paste it in here. So the animation happens at the same time again, and this isn't what we want. So I'm going to go back into the Spline Editor, and I'm just going to uncheck this because we don't need it anymore. I'm going to make sure that the second text becomes filled with squares, and the third text has to have the checkbox. I'm just going to move this a little bit forward like that, and I want to go to the frame. 1 second. I want to go to the frame where this animation ends. So let's go frame by frame, and I think 135 is a good frame to do it. So I'm going to open the spline again, and I'm going to select these keyframes. And remember, we're only editing the third text. This one is look at it only, read only. You can't touch it. So I'm gonna draw. Oh, Control Z. See, that's where the shift can be a little bit tricky. The shift only lets you move on one axis, either up or down or left and right. So whichever direction you move first, that's the only direction you can move. So you have to make sure that you move left to right first. So we can modify our time values without modifying our actual values here. It can be a little bit complicated, but I'm pretty sure you get what I mean. So let's view this animation. All right. So now I'm going to take our background, move it closer here, and I'm going to merge these together, all of the text elements. They're not going to bother each other because they all happen at different times. So if I view this, you'll see that playback is a little bit slow. Just need to go to frame 0. Since we have 3 text nodes, the playback can be a little bit lagged, but we get our animation here. And here we have our second text, and here we have our third text. This is basically all that we need. Now I'm going to merge our text with our background, and let's see what we got. So this looks really good. We have our text, we have our background, and everything looks good together. The colors complement each other. We have an eased in animation, we have a dynamic font, but there's still something missing, something to add a little bit of depth, a little bit of character to this animation. And that is number 4, shadows. So when you're working in Fusion, you might want to add the shadow node, and it works pretty well. You can add some softness. You can move this a little bit down here, just a little bit. You don't want to create the rough effect, but this effect is a little bit cheesy because if you move this a little bit too far down, you'll see that the edges are not connecting with the text. It looks like it's hovering a little bit over the surface, and this isn't necessarily bad, but it does look a little bit cheesy. So that's why I created a new free plugin that you can get on my website called Real Shadow. So Real Shadow, right off the bat, give these dynamic looking shadows. It makes it look really, really like deep and give some depth to the image. You can choose whatever color you want, and I want to bring the decay up just by a little bit, make this a little bit more solid. And I'm gonna go hit the fit button. So here is our text, and we can move this light position around, but I'm not gonna do that because I make this corner lighter on purpose so that we can see that the light is coming from this direction and the shadows are cast accordingly. So this really adds some depth, and this is GPU accelerated, so it works really quickly. It uses code from the Raise node, and you guys might be wondering, how did you do that if DaVinci Resolve isn't open source? Well, what some people might not know is that the Raise node isn't a real node. It is actually a fuse that comes built into DaVinci Resolve. So that's how I was able to take some of the code from, I mean, a lot of the code from here and make this plugin. So it really adds some depth to our motion graphics. And if you guys are familiar with the Shadow Studio 2 plugin for After Effects, you'll feel right at home with this. So the last thing I want to do, I mean, when it comes to the shadows, I'm just going to switch to double viewer right now. I want to select this color for the shadows because the light is coming from over there. That's the color. But this is way too light. So what am I going to do? I'm just going to hover my mouse over this value, and I'm just going to left click and drag in this direction. So that's a little bit too light, and you definitely don't want to go into negative values. So I'm just gonna bring it a little bit higher to give it a little bit softness, and this makes it match perfectly. So here is our animation, and to make this look just a little bit better, you're going to need to connect this to the media out node, and we're going to go to the edit tab. And in the edit tab, I'm going to go to timeline menu, and I'm going to hover over output blanking and select 2.35, and this really adds the cinematic aspect ratio to these motion graphics. So it's starting to look really good, and you can get this plugin for free in the link in the description below. And I really hope you guys liked this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'd really like to hear what you guys think in the comments below. So until next time, I'm David Cohen, and this is Learn Now Effects.